Thank you so much, Jessica, for taking time out to join us here at the Dwelling Show. I really appreciate it. And I know I'm going to learn so much from you today. So I'm just going to quickly just tell our Dwell listeners about Jessica. She's the founder and CEO of interviewconnections.com, the premier guest booking agency for podcasters and guest experts. And she's the acclaimed author of Interview Connections, How to Rock the Podcast from Both Sides of the Mic. She also hosts the Interview Connections TV, where each week she helps our viewers rock the podcast from both sides of the mic. I think you can do a way better job than I can, Jessica. So just tell our Dwell listeners a little bit more about you and what you've been up to lately.
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm the founder and CEO of interviewconnections.com, and we're the leading guest booking agency. So essentially what I've been doing for the last 4 years, I started my business 4 years ago as a virtual assistant, booking interviews for entrepreneurs and podcasters, and I've grown my business. We now have an in-house staff of employees that are booking interviews full-time. We book probably around 300 to 400 interviews a month. Work with a lot of real estate investors. Podcasting is a fantastic way for real estate investors to, connect with new deals, new capital, and actually just learn a lot. There's a lot of seminars and stuff that I'm sure you could pay a lot of money to go to, but there's amazing free information that you can get on podcasts. And, if you host a show, you get a lot of free information by interviewing other experts and other, more experienced investors. So, as I said, I have my own show as well. My podcast is called #Rock the Podcast. So that's a weekly show I do with my COO here every week. So I encourage you to check that out as well after you listen to this episode.
Awesome. So I'm just kind of curious. So what made you basically make the shift from being a VA to, kind of doing the podcast and the guest booking side of the business?
Yeah, I started my business when I became a mom. So I was working from home with my baby boy, and I really, at first, my goal was to just have that, income, to just generate income from home on my own time, on my own schedule. So for a while, I didn't really care what I was doing. But after a while, my virtual assistant business was, doing okay. I was bringing in a few $100s a month, supplementing my husband's income. So it was fine. But I realized I got to a point where I wanted to make more money, but I didn't want to work more hours, because the thing about babies is that they get older, they start crawling, they start walking, they nap less. And I realized if I'm actually going to increase my income, I can't just work more hours. So the other question is, okay, do I just charge more per hour? And I was pretty new in business, right? I wasn't able to, maybe you could argue that I was, but I didn't feel like I could suddenly just start charging $50 or $100 an hour. I was brand new. So I talked to my dad, my dad's a business coach, and I said, I really want to make more money. Is there some way that I can change my business where I can, make more money and not necessarily work more hours? So he really coached me and helped me, look at all the different services that I was providing to my clients. I was doing actually Pinterest marketing. So Pinterest is a social media site, and I learned how to market a business on Pinterest, and I would manage my clients' Pinterest profiles. I would create infographics, do client support and sales calls for my clients. And I was booking interviews, and I said, well, podcasting really seems to be taking off. People really like getting interviewed. I always feel like people are really happy when they get connected with that next interview opportunity. So my dad said, let's focus there. You really like that. There's a demand there. There's opportunities. So he helped me come up with the idea for interviewconnections.com. So in September of 2013, so we're at our 4-year anniversary, I started the business, and it was just me for a while. So I was still a virtual assistant, but I was kind of starting to create a brand for myself. And over time, I grew it. I incorporated the business. I started hiring virtual assistants to work for me. And then the most recent transition was this year, when we went from having a remote team to an in-house staff.
Oh, wow. So that's definitely a big step from just working with other VAs remotely, but also having them in-house. So that's congratulations on that shift. So
Thank you. Yeah, it's been an enormous transition.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So if I'm a mom, I'm at home with my newborn baby. My wife is that mom right now. We just had our baby too. She's 3 months old. So
great.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So she's definitely keeping my wife busy. So if she's listening to this and she's like, I want to do something similar to what Jessica's doing, how do, moms or even dads that want to kind of follow your path, how do they get started?
Yeah, so I would say first is to really learn. I educated myself. I had worked at a nonprofit, so I was really coming into the world of online business and marketing and podcasting without a lot of experience, really no experience at all. So I learned a ton. And I also realized that while I had been a staff director at my last job, I kind of had to start at the bottom and work my way back up. So when you move to kind of a different industry, you need to pay your dues and learn and work your way back up. Find a mentor, somebody that can guide you, which is where podcasting can come in. You can really learn a lot from somebody who has been where you want to be, where you want to go. So my recommendation would be to just dive deep into educating yourself, whether that's listening to podcasts, reading books, taking courses. There's just so many courses that you can buy for $197, $97. And just that's how kind of I started with the Pinterest marketing. I took a course. It was like, 97 or 197. And I went through this course and just learned a ton about Pinterest. So then I could go to a client and confidently say, I know all this about Pinterest marketing and I can do this for you. Those clients that I did the Pinterest marketing for, they were my first clients with Interview Connections. So after I got that business, they knew, like, and trusted me. So then when I started learning about podcasting, they signed up with Interview Connections for that. So I would just say my biggest advice would be to, get really educated with what you're doing.
Oh, wow. That's pretty amazing. Pinterest marketing. I mean, I know Pinterest. I think I'm on Pinterest, but I've rarely actually gone on Pinterest. So can you kind of just walk our audience through what that is?
I haven't talked about Pinterest in a long time. Pinterest is a graphic, image-based social media site. So yeah, I, to be honest with you, I have not talked about Pinterest in quite a while. I use it to find recipes and hairstyles, but if you have kind of an image-based business,
okay,
could be good for real estate investors to kind of collect images of your homes and properties, but I don't want to really talk much about something I haven't educated myself on in a while.
I just found it really fascinating.
Yeah.
Just this, but I think the idea, which is anything that you want to do, you need to get super educated on before jumping into. So I think that's a great takeaway. So now you have the Interview Connections business, and clearly that's going, pretty well. So can you kind of walk us through what that process looks like? So if I'm a podcaster or I'm thinking of podcasting, what does that service from you guys, what does that look like?
Yeah. So if you are thinking about starting a podcast, or you're going to start a podcast, or you have a show and you need guests, we're essentially your producer, your booker. So you would tell us what kinds of interviews you want to do, who your target audience is, what kind of experts you want to feature on your show. And then my company, I have agents here. We learn about your podcast, who you want, and we research and find people that are a good fit for your show. So that's how our service works, is we get to know our clients really well, what their needs are, what their criteria is. We bring them guest suggestions and the people that they want to interview. We then go and request them and get them booked on the show.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. So in terms of the podcasting, I mean, one thing that as a podcaster myself, that's pretty challenging is finding guests, basically going out there on the internet, trying to research and basically recruit interviewees. So what are you guys doing differently that, someone like me, just starting out, bootstrapping my business? What are you guys doing that I'm missing?
Okay. So I would, well, I don't know exactly what we're doing that you're not doing, but I would say my recommendations and my tips would be on how to find guests when you're just getting started and you're like, I'm just going to Google, there are other people who have started real estate investing podcasts. So there are people that have been where you are, where you're going. So number one is just to poach their list of guests, go through and see, because there's always other podcasts out there that have interviewed similar kinds of experts to who you want to interview. So I would that's a big recommendation, is just to go to similar kinds of shows and go through their site and see who they've interviewed, and then reach out to those potential guests. But I think, the answer is just to get really clear on who your target audience is. Why, before I start every episode of my podcast, I like to ask myself, my co-host and I talk, like, why would someone want to listen to this episode? What are they going to learn from it? Why is this relevant to my show? So I like to, as a podcaster, I like to have topics that I want to teach my audience and then find the guest that's most relevant to that topic, rather than thinking, what name should I find? Think, okay, I want an expert in XYZ, and then you find an expert who has done that. So for example, if you want an expert in, investing, like land investing, you could say, Google land investing podcast interview, and then find the people that have been interviewed about land investing.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. Those are great tips for me. So now, let's say I'm thinking of starting a podcast, right? But I just don't understand how important, or if it's going to work as an investor, right? Or even an investor to be. You're podcasting, every week. How has that impacted your business, and just generally?
Yeah, well, it's impacted it positively in a few different ways. I have gotten clients from my podcast, not a lot of clients from the podcast directly, but there was one client who actually was Googling around looking for information about podcasting and podcast interviews. She found my site, listened to one of my episodes, and then signed up to become a client. So it kind of helped close the deal, so to speak. Another benefit that my podcast has in my business is it gives me a platform to interview clients and friends, potential clients. So a couple different examples for you. We love interviewing our clients on our podcast because I have a staff, a team who's working not face to face, but is working directly with my clients. I don't always talk to all my clients all the time. So for me to be able to bring them on my podcast and have a conversation with them, it's good for client retention. It keeps my clients with me longer because they're connecting with me in that way, and I am offering them exposure to my audience in that way. It's also a great way to meet with perspective. I looked at this person and I thought to myself, she would be a really good client. I invited her on the show, and now she's like, oh wait, you do this? Oh gosh, I really hired you guys. I'm like, yeah, I know. But if I had just said no thanks and I didn't interview her, that, I wouldn't have gotten anything out of that. So by interviewing her on the show, I'm giving her value, giving her exposure, and she's really likely to now want to work with us. So, so those are a couple of ways that you can have your podcast benefit you. But again, podcasting is a long-term strategy. It's really not something that's going to, you can really get frustrated in the first couple of months. You're like, oh, I don't have a big audience. At the same time, give it at least 6 months, at least. I would say give it a year. Just don't expect have low expectations and low standards. Don't expect the podcast to be this cash cow. It's going to get me so much money and I'm going to be so famous. You got to do a podcast because you're passionate about what you do and what you talk about. And you need to be able to talk about your topic for hours on end and have conversations with people about it, just for the sheer joy of having a conversation about it. And I was telling this, my co-host and I did an episode yesterday, and we actually said, listen, I would do this podcast if nobody listened. If we had one download, Margie's mom, I would still do this episode. I would still do this podcast because I just love it. It's fun.
Wow, that's really, really amazing, because a podcaster like me and a beginner to start with, I'm looking at my numbers and I'm like, oh my God, I could get more downloads. I want really big numbers like 10K and whatever. But I think from listening to you now, I can just think about my podcasting differently, right? And I think that's a good segue for my next question. So that's one section of podcasting that maybe people don't really understand, that you can actually monetize your podcast. So can you give us some examples of how, the obvious one is like ads, but kind of other examples of how you can monetize your podcast?
So most people listening to this, including me and you, are not going to monetize their podcast with ads. So I would really not focus on that as an avenue. If you are an entrepreneur, if you are a real estate investor, you're thinking about starting a podcast, you should do it because it is a vehicle by which you can create relationships strategically, and it's a way for you to hone your message and have conversations with your audience. you should really do a podcast for the passion of podcasting and broadcasting your message. An extremely small percentage of podcasts get monetized through advertisements. And personally, I don't like podcasts that have ads on them as much. I think it waters down the show, and I don't like it. So a lot of people, I can get ads, I can make money doing this. You're probably not going to. So don't get your hopes up. Don't do it for that reason.
Wow, that's definitely
You're
good.
You're getting a lot more money investing in real estate. Trust me.
That is definitely good to know. That is definitely good to know. Okay, that's fantastic. So if I'm somebody now, I'm thinking, you know what, I want to go start a podcast, or I want to just learn more about how, Jessica could help build my business. How can people reach out to you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, interviewconnections.com is the best place to go. You can read, we've got case studies on there about how we've helped podcasters and guests. You can click over and read our blog and listen to our podcast. So yeah, interviewconnections.com.
Awesome. So we're definitely doing into the quick round. So these are like quick questions and quick answers. The first question I always ask every guest is, what is the differentiating trait that makes you different from the other girl or the other guy? What is that one unique trait that you have that somebody else doesn't have?
So I guess my first instinct is what makes my business different. And we've got in-house employees. No other booking agency that I know about actually has an in-house staff. So that's something that sets us apart.
Awesome. Next question. What was your last book that you read? And what was the one thing that you learned from that book?
So let's see. I'm currently reading the book How to Meditate by Pema Chodron. And the last book that I read, it's called Awake at Work. I forget the subtitle, by Michael Cardone or Carone, or I forget his last name.
Okay.
But I've been reading a lot of books about meditation and mindfulness. So I'm trying to I know this is the quick round. I'm so bad at the quick round. I get immediately slower when someone says quick round.
It's okay. You can break the rules.
I guess I'm going to go back 3 books, to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And what I learned from that book is the importance of just living fully in the present moment.
Wow. Awesome. We'll put those books in the show notes. Last question. So you've got interviewconnections.com going. Of course, you got your beautiful kids and, your partner. What do you do for fun?
I do yoga for fun. Nice. I love yoga. And I also started doing anti-gravity yoga, which is where there's these hammocks hanging from the ceiling and you can hang upside down and do yoga in these swing hammocks. It's really fun. Wow.
Never heard of those. That sounds awesome.
It's great. Yeah, it's awesome. Anti-gravity yoga.
Fantastic. Jessica, I've learned so much. I really appreciate you taking time out to join us here, in the dwelling community. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.